If other people actually do not exist and they are just Maya, then what is the point of interacting with them? You see, this is a big challenge that most spiritual speakers seek from time to time. They come across this challenge, and I think this is the biggest challenge when it comes to awakening, and probably it's the biggest barrier to awakening. And when you're on the other side, you can finally call awakened. The thing is, after many spiritual awakenings, uh, a handful, and based on them, and based on my heightened sense of consciousness that I'm experiencing right now, I just wanted to record this message and share my experience. Into the insight, like what it actually feels like, and whether it is actually right to think of other versus me in a dualistic sense. You see, the I used to be trapped. I used to find myself be trapped in this, what you may call a dualistic, solipsistic bubble, solipsistic trap, you may call it. I used to find myself a lot in this solipsistic trap, where it's about, I used to think like, so the other is not there. So it also means that it means that I am there. In the sense, I'm referring to the egoic I. But I never quite understood, and I never quite felt it this way, that when we say that the other doesn't exist, it just means that there is no separation between the perceived other, as in nothing exists, which means that this also doesn't exist. The ego exists, but it's only Maya, just like the ego of others. I will try my best to make as much sense as possible, but you know how these things go. Other is the person that you communicate to, and self is the egoic self is the person who you think you are. So in in when ego finds itself locked in the solipsistic paradigm, then ego perceives itself as the ego, the egoic self, and just comes to the conclusion that the ego exists, but everything else isn't existing. Everything else is not there except the ego. That is the difference between solipsistic lock and the awakening. When you find yourself, when you find awakened, because there is no yourself at that point anymore. So when you find awakened, then that's all there is. Whatever there is, the Maya, that is everything that's there, it's all illusion. So the Maya is the illusion, and you, the ego, is the part of the Maya, which means that what's real is the nothing, the nothingness. Now, coming to the main topic, so why to interact with the other if the other doesn't exist? Well, when you find yourself truly awakened, which means that when the ego is dead, then nothing actually exists. So all there is the dream left, that is the dream, the Maya. So in Maya, just play the dream, like you would be participating in a dream, a very lucid, strong, concrete dream. That's it. That's all that is left of it to do. Because in death, when the ego is dead, when your whatever you identified as is dead, then whatever remains can interact with one another. So in that sense, actually there is a lot of meaning in interacting with the perceived other, but it only makes sense if you're not locked in a solipsistic lock. If you find, if the ego find itself in locked in a solipsistic paradigm, and then it will be very confusing, because the ego will be wondering how it makes sense, because it in the ego locked in the solipsistic paradigm, for that ego the only thing that makes sense is that the others don't exist, but I still do. In the sense that the ego feels that the ego still exists, but not really. That's not the truth. The truth, after awakening, is the person realizes is that the ego is, that is when there is no person there that is realizing anymore. The person is there, but the perceived, the illusional person, the illusion of the person, the ego, that is the intelligence, the ever present, whatever you want to call it, that realizes, the consciousness basically realizes that all there is consciousness. So in consciousness, any fragment of consciousness can interact with any other fragment of consciousness, which is completely makes sense. But for it to make sense, the ego, it will never make sense to the ego, because the ego, how will it make sense? Because if the ego is not conscious that it is the ego, and hence it is a delusion, or rather consciousness mimicking itself as the ego, thinking of itself as the ego, if it stays in that paradigm, how can it be aware and conscious of consciousness, where it has realized, where consciousness has realized that ego was just a dust in the wind, like nothing, never existed. So for this realization to hit the ego, for this realization to hit, you have to awaken. For this realization to hit, consciousness has to awaken. When consciousness awakens, it understands. Everything becomes as clear as water, because then the consciousness can see, and it's like, okay, I get it now. So no one exists. It's not just that I exist and the other, the perceived other, or I exist and the others don't. No, it's just that no one exists. There's no I, no other. I used to find myself trapped in this I used to find myself trapped in this solipsistic lock, or I used to get confused when people used to say that there is only I, there is no other, there is only I. But that's not really true. There is no I, there is no other. The dualism, in any consciousness where dualism is coming into play, is it's just Maya, because in real consciousness there is no distinction, no duality, only the consciousness itself exists. So, to answer the question, if others don't exist, then what's the point of interacting with them? The answer to that question is there is no other and there's no I, there's no separation, there's only consciousness, and if you awaken, you can see it. Just awaken and you'll see. And then when you, if you come back down, if your consciousness shrinks back to its egoic form, then you will again miss it, then you will again forget about it. It's just how it is. You like it or don't like it, it's just how it is.